Everyone knows the legend of Area 51. But the real documented nightmare is not in Nevada. It's in the Utah desert, and its story is far more terrifying than any myth. A closed military proving ground in Utah covering nearly 800,000 acres. Officially, it exists, but getting inside is almost impossible. Together with the neighboring Utah Test and Training Range, this zone sits inside one of the largest blocks of restricted military airspace in the entire continental United States. And the most disturbing thing about Dugway is this: its darkest stories are not rumors. During World War II, they built full-scale German and Japanese neighborhoods here. Not movie sets, not abstract targets. Real residential buildings made from materials designed to match the originals as closely as possible. The Library of Congress archives directly describe Dugway's German village as the main American testing ground for incendiary bombs before the bombing campaigns over German cities. In other words, in the middle of the Utah desert, the military was learning how to burn enemy cities more efficiently. But the real nightmare came later. 1968. Thousands of sheep suddenly die outside the perimeter. At first, the military denied any connection, but later an internal report admitted that the VX evidence found in the snow and grass was undeniable, and the concentration was enough to explain the mass deaths. The Army paid compensation for 6,249 sheep, yet never officially admitted fault. For local residents, this became a terrifying signal. Whatever happens inside Dugway can move far beyond its fences. And that was not the end. Federal records and FOIA documents point to hundreds of open-air biological agent tests, while several reports directly discuss the delivery of lethal and incapacitating chemical substances. Then in 2015, Dugway found itself at the center of another scandal, when live anthrax samples were accidentally shipped to hundreds of laboratories across the U.S. and overseas. That is why Dugway has been called Area 52 for decades. And that is exactly why rumors still surround it. Rumors that something even stranger may be hidden behind those secured gates. But the most frightening thing about Dugway is that even without conspiracy theories, its real history already sounds like a horror film. Mock enemy cities, open-air agent testing, dead herds beyond the perimeter, and a modern failure involving live anthrax. And if this is only what the public was allowed to see, how much still remains hidden behind black bars of censorship? If Dugway is the place where the government spent decades rehearsing what catastrophe looks like, then the next location is even more disturbing. Because this was only the backup plan. There are places the government hides through denial. And then there is Mount Weather, a place it acknowledges only enough for you to understand one thing: you are not supposed to get any closer. Formally, it is FEMA's Emergency Operations Center, hidden in the mountains of Virginia, about an hour from Washington, D.C. But the dry language of federal regulations reads almost like a warning. The site is designated as a restricted area. Access is granted strictly on official necessity. Everything you bring in can be searched. And photography, sketching layouts, making notes about the buildings, or even carrying a camera without separate authorization is forbidden. The most disturbing thing about Mount Weather is the contrast. At the beginning of the 20th century, it was a weather station. Historical archives list the Mount Weather Observation Station as a real scientific facility operating from 1905 to 1914. Back then, this mountain looked to the sky and collected weather data. Later, it became part of a system designed to survive a day when the crisis would no longer be in the atmosphere, but in the government itself. That is why Mount Weather is frightening, not as a mythical base, but as an officially acknowledged facility whose most important functions are still hidden behind layers of restricted access. The official fact sheet lists things that sound almost ordinary: dormitories and training rooms, a cafeteria serving more than 280 people, a fire and emergency medical unit, a health unit, and a federal police force operating around the clock. But in the context of continuity, this no longer feels like ordinary infrastructure. It feels like a place where power is preparing not just to hide, but to continue functioning when the capital itself no longer can. And the same document adds another chilling detail. A significant part of these missions remains mostly classified. Even more unsettling is how the facility appears in budget documents. There, Mount Weather is described as a hub that provides reliable support, redundant infrastructure, and resilient capabilities for continuity programs, incident management, and classified missions across multiple federal departments and agencies. So even in the open, bureaucratic language of government paperwork, this is not just another base. This is a backup command structure designed for the moment when the normal center of power fails. Then came September 11th, and the system stopped being theoretical. Congressional leadership was flown there by helicopter, and later reports described the site as one of the main relocation facilities for the highest levels of federal authority. And if this sounds like nothing more than a Cold War relic, the documents say otherwise. Congress has allocated tens of millions of dollars in capital improvements and continuity-related expenses for the site, while more recent budget materials classify MWEOC as a national security asset and a Level 5 security facility that is still being modernized. America does not simply remember this mountain. It is still preparing it for the day it may be needed again. And if Mount Weather is the place where the U.S. government prepares to survive catastrophe, then the next location is even more disturbing. Because there, the state is not simply hiding from the end of the world. It is preparing to operate after it. And in first place is the site that completely breaks the logic of this entire list. Because one of America's most important intelligence hubs is not even located inside the United States. It is hidden deep in the Australian outback, beneath white radomes, and it is called Pine Gap. Formally, it is a joint facility. In reality, it is the place where American secrecy expands to a global scale. It all began in 1966. On paper, it was the Joint Defense Space Research Facility, an almost innocent-sounding space installation. But by 1970, a base near Alice Springs was already operating, one that would later be openly described as part of a satellite surveillance and intelligence collection system. In 1988, Australian Prime Minister Bob Hawke publicly referred to it as a satellite ground station collecting intelligence data for the security of both Australia and the United States. Later, parliamentary materials described it even more openly as an intelligence collection facility. Then in 1999, the Australian Parliament became even more specific. It described Pine Gap as a ground control and processing station for satellites in geostationary orbit. And after that line, Pine Gap stops feeling like just another strange desert base. It becomes part of an orbital intelligence architecture. So what exactly do they capture there? Missile telemetry, signals from large radar systems, communications from other satellites, and even microwave emissions from the Earth's surface. So Pine Gap is not simply a place that is listening. It is a site where they build a technical map of weapon systems, air defenses, and military infrastructure, layer by layer. On the American side, the presence of the National Reconnaissance Office has been officially confirmed. Historical Australian records and ABC reporting have also linked Pine Gap to the NSA and CIA for years. But the important detail is this: the exact modern balance of those roles is still not publicly disclosed, and that is exactly what makes the site even more disturbing. The secrecy here is not even symbolic. Parliamentary records show that access to the site requires direct approval from Australia's Minister of Defence. More than that, Pine Gap is legally designated as a prohibited area. So the secrecy here is not atmosphere. It is law, and it does not stop there. The airspace above it is covered by Restricted Area R215. Aircraft are prohibited from entering a 2.5 nautical mile radius around the base, from the surface all the way up to 18,000 feet. Pine Gap is a place where even the sky is closed. And now comes the moment when Pine Gap stops being just another strange base. During the Middle East crisis, the site entered red alert status, and according to ABC's reconstruction, Australia's Prime Minister did not know about it in advance. That means one of America's most critical intelligence sites outside U.S. borders may already have entered global crisis mode before the leader of the host country even realized it. Then came the age of leaks. Snowden documents, later published by ABC, place Pine Gap under the code name Rainfall as a facility supporting intelligence activities and military operations, including geolocation intelligence for target acquisition. And that kind of geolocation can be used for special forces missions and drone strikes. That is why Pine Gap is more disturbing than most legends. It does not need to be invented. It exists openly. Australia officially acknowledges it as a joint facility. Yet at the same time, the government, by long-standing practice, refuses to comment on its real operations. And the drier the language of the documents surrounding Pine Gap becomes, the less anyone explains how far its real role actually reaches. And that is exactly why Pine Gap is the perfect final location on this list. Not because the site does not exist, but because its true function remained hidden for decades behind phrases like joint facility, space research, and national security. If you enjoy places where dry government documents sound more terrifying than myths, this is Mystery Report. Subscribe, because the next story will feel even closer to reality than you would like.